you have to think of anything that relates to the domain of information and communication, and that's what the planet Mercury rules. And when it goes into its retrograde phase, well, it makes everything a bit chaotic, and it throws it out of whack. And I know people say to me, well, how can that be? Well, what you have to understand about astrology is that it's very much based on vibration, as everything in this universe has a vibration. So, you know, what happens above affects us below. If the planet is giving off a funny kind of energy, we're going to feel that within the fiber of everything on this planet here, and that's how it all works. So, oh yes, and have you been watching the World Championships for the athletics? Well, I mean, maybe you have, maybe you haven't, but it's been quite interesting because, of course, Usain Bolt, who is absolutely phenomenal, false started and was disqualified from the 100-meter, so he couldn't actually compete in that, and of course he is the Olympic champion. And he wasn't the only one having problems. All sorts of things were going wrong for all sorts of different athletes. And let's see, Davon Robles, I believe that's his name. He's the 100-meter high hurdle champion. He was in the race and going over the hurdles, and a couple of times bumped into the Chinese athlete, and he won the race, but then ended up having to be disqualified. So he became world champion and then lost the title for obstruction. So many strange things. And also the 4x100, the British team got itself into a bit of a mess during the 4x100. Basically on the last leg, the British one of the runners of the last leg, the British runner, he was in his lane, but his body seemed to have been in the next lane for whatever reason, and that lane was the American lane. So as the incoming runner was coming, he bumped into the upper shoulders of the British athlete and literally took a somersault in mid-air and fell onto the ground, and then affected the lane next to him. So well, there was all sorts of things going on, in the World Championships. It was very, very bizarre, and definitely a Mercury retrograde scenario. So all of that's now coming to an end. And thank goodness for that, because I don't think this planet could take another week of Mercury moving in a strange way. So hopefully you should be finding your feet, and things you have been trying to get off the ground should now be getting some kind of momentum. It probably will take another week, but most likely by September, by next week this time, you'll be off and running. And I've got some sad news. My event, Future Talk 2012 and Beyond, it's had to be cancelled. This is mainly because of low ticket sales, but I would like to thank those of you who did buy a ticket and did show interest. Unfortunately, there's a lot going on with the economy. A lot of people are holding on to their money, and, these types of things are the first types of things to really feel the crunch. Events and the artistic world, we all feel it first. So I've had to actually cancel the event. It would have been a good one. I was going to have Anne Ella come over from the United States. Anne's been a guest on my show previously. And I was also going to be joined by Alex G from On the Edge, from Edge Media. But, well, anyway, it had to be cancelled. So onwards and upwards, as they say. But nothing is lost completely, because I had planned on talking about Planet X throughout the month of September for both of these shows. So tonight, of course, I'm going to be talking about Planet X, and we'll also talk about this Comet Elenin. What is it? What is it not? There's a lot of speculation as to what Comet Elenin is. And I'll be talking about it again in another show later in September. So as I was saying, there seems to be a lot of confusion out there about what Comet Elenin is. Is it Planet X? Is it not? I mean, as far as I'm concerned, Comet Elenin is not Planet X. That's my feel on it, and I'm not the only person that thinks that. Jalila Starr, for example, I know she has said that Comet Elenin is not Planet X. Nancy Leader has also said that as well. And also, of course, Anne Ella has definitely said that she does not feel that Comet Elenin is Planet X, and actually she feels that Comet Elenin is more so a distraction and it's disinformation. But she'll be able to support her statement in her next interview, in her next follow-up interview when I speak to her later in the month. So, there's a lot of confusion out there on the internet, But I think what's been going on with Comet Elenin is that both professional and amateur astronomers have been looking at this body. They've been, I know at least, with amateur type astronomers or people just interested in general, have been playing around with, certain types of software that allows you to look at the alignments of the planets and what have you. And they've been coming up with this idea that when Comet Elenin makes a certain alignment, things are happening. Mostly seismic activity is happening. I believe it's assumed that the earthquake in Chile and also the earthquake in Japan had a certain kind of alignment with Comet Elenin, and hence the high intensity earthquake. So is this truly the case? Or is it just HARP? There's just so much out there, and you really do have to sift through the information and make a deduction for yourself. No one's going to spoon feed you this information. You have to feel what's right for you, and you have to know if it's correct or if it's not correct. But I'll be doing my best tonight to try to bring some light to what all of this is. What is Planet X? What might Comet Elenin really be? I've got a great guest tonight, Andy Lloyd, author of Dark Star, and we'll try to figure out the fact from the fiction if we can. I mean, nothing is for certain in life, but we'll give it a go. And I think it's going to be a great show. Oh, and another news I just wanted to share with you. I was a guest on the show On the Edge last Thursday, which airs on Edge Media TV. That's Sky Channel 200. And I was a guest with Alex G on his show, and I had a great time, and a really fantastic crew there at Edge Media TV. They do a really, really good job, and I thought that I would just share with you a bit about what Edge Media do, because not everybody has Sky TV. You can receive Edge Media, also known as Controversial TV, through FreeSat, which is a satellite TV a device, or you can get it through having a subscription with Sky TV. And from what I understand, you don't necessarily have to have any subscription with Sky. You don't have to buy any fancy movie packages or anything like that, or sports or anything like that. You can actually just get it with basic Sky. But Edge Media is an independent TV channel, and it allows alternative and suppressed views to be aired. And they've had some difficulty. They were off air for a while last year. They are back. They used to stream online as well for free, and that was also stopped. But they will be coming back with some new programs, and also bringing back their streaming service. So lots of people from around the world will be able to catch them online, and they do a really, really good job. It's such an excellent channel. They'll have things on there like Democracy Now! I don't know if you've ever caught Democracy Now!, but that's hosted by Amy Goodman, and Democracy Now! Have actually won quite a few awards, I think, in the past, but they syndicate around the globe, and Democracy Now! Is a great alternative to the corporate news that's out there, to BBC, to Channel 4, Sky, so they do an excellent job trying to get different information out. And you'll also catch things like let's see, Zeitgeist has been aired on Edge Media TV, and also America, From Freedom to Fascism, that movie, that's also been aired. So really great content. So keep your eye out. If you'd like to know more about Edge Media, just visit their website. I believe it's edgemediatv.com, something like that. But great channel. So I'm going to move on with the show, because I can sit here and just talk, and I've got a show to get on with. And we're going to take a break, and when we come back, I'm going to be joined by my guest tonight, who is Andy Lloyd. Back here tonight with me, your host, Valentine St. Aubin. This is Esoteric Discussions here on Peterborough FM, and we are live. It's Wednesday night, and tonight I'm joined by a very special guest, Andy Lloyd, who's the author of Dark Star. Before I bring him on, I just want to make a correction of myself, because I didn't give out the right website address for Edge Media. I believe it's emtvonline.co.uk, and that should take you to their website, so you can check them out. Okay, so we're going to move along. So tonight, as I said, I'm joined by a very good guest. He's a a brilliant artist. I've checked out some of his artwork, and he's got many talents. But he is the author of a publication that he wrote quite a few years ago now, back in 2005, called Dark Star, The Planet X Evidence. And he's gone on and he's written 2 fictional novels as well. So he's got quite a lot of talent, and I think you're going to enjoy what he's got to say tonight about his own research on Planet X and what he makes of all of this. So I'm just going to bring him on and open up his mic. Andy, are you there?
Yeah, hi Valentine.
Hello there, thank you for joining me tonight. I'm really looking forward to talking to you. One of the things that I like about your work is that you have the scientific side of yourself, but you also have this creative side as well. And I think that's very important in where we are, where we're trying to go. Like you, I mean, I have a scientific side to myself that I enjoy as well, but I'm not limited by that. I can also expand into other areas and explore my creativity as well. So it's nice to connect with other people who are on that same kind of wavelength. So I just want to, for the audience, because not everybody, listening to tonight might be aware of your work or even aware of exactly what Planet X is. They might have heard this, they might have heard that. So let's just take it back from the beginning. Let's talk about your first book that you wrote, Dark Star. And it's very interesting because, I mean, how did you begin to research this subject? Because it's not really something that everybody's going to just fall into, let's say.
I got into it because I became very interested in ufology in general, UFOs. Mm-hmm. I was a scientist. I did a degree in chemistry, and I was actually on a PhD program out in California. And I, like you were saying, really enjoyed doing science, but I had this very creative edge to me. I was out in California, I had long hair. I was, a bit unusual really for a scientist, and I started to pick through their library just about anything I could get hold of that was weird and wonderful to generate sort of interesting ideas very creatively, and worked through stacks of books on the UFO subject. And eventually I came across one by a guy called Alan Alford, who was he was the first person I read who seriously discussed the subject of Planet X, and I'd not really come across it that much before. And because of my scientific background, I kind of clued right into it to try and figure out whether there was some possible reality to the idea of another planet in our solar system. Because it seems on the face of it that, scientists, have figured out that there's 9 planets or 8 planets, depending on how you want to define it. And most people would think, well, that's it then. They've sorted it, and we're talking about star systems in other galaxies now. But in actual fact, it's a little bit more complicated than that. Planets, when they are quite far away from the sun, are very difficult to spot. In actual fact, you don't have to go much further than Pluto for things to start to get quite murky out there. So it became an interesting subject to me, and through reading his book, I got onto Zecharia Sitchin, who is a similar kind of guy to Eric von Daniken. I mean, most people have heard of von Daniken. I know
von Daniken very well. Mm-hmm.
And Sitchin was the same sort of field insofar as he was looking at the question of whether we'd been visited in the past by extraterrestrials, and whether they'd left not just a sort of a calling card, but had actually, he was going a bit further than the von Daniken, had really sculptured our entire race and species and ancient civilizations. And this was like really far out stuff, really.
Yeah.
So I really enjoyed getting into that, and my scientific mind sort of, I can park that for a little while as you would sort of explore the creative side of it. But it's always niggling in the background, and it was trying to get me to say, well, if these guys were from Planet X, how would that work? And that's how I got onto Dark Star.
I mean, it's all of this is very interesting. I mean, I'm an amateur astrologer. I'm not a professional astrologer, but astrology obviously is connected with astronomy. They used to be connected up until about 100 years ago, and then a division was finally sort of brought in because it was seen as something not suitable for the scientific community, although scientists had used it in the past. But what's always interesting is the way that in the scientific community and how they interact with the public. They always make it seem as if, outer space is empty. Yeah. You've got these few planets that circle around the sun that everybody knows about. We all learn that in school. But yet, most people would say, but space is kind of empty. And that's completely far from the truth, because there's a lot going on up there, in the stars. There's a lot of movement. There's so much going on, and there's so many other bodies that astronomers are always finding. I just lose track of all the different bodies that they've listed here and there. I mean, they found Sedna recently. They found, we can put Chiron out there. It's an asteroid. Eris as well. I mean, there's so much, and it's trying to get people to open up their minds, at least even just to that much, to say, listen, we have a solar system here. I know science says we have A, B, and C, but what if I was to tell you there could be D, E, and F as well?
Yeah.
How do you feel about that? And I think that's what's good about your work, and I know a bit about it. I know that you began to write this, well, you wrote the book probably before 2005, but brought it out in 2005. And in a sense, we're here now in 2011, and it seems like people are now more ready for that type of work. How do you feel about that?
We go through phases with the Planet X subject. Historically, it goes back over 100 years. And in fact, the planet Pluto was discovered because astronomers were looking for what they call Planet X, even back then. Mm-hmm. They believed it to be a very, very large body, sort of another gas giant, that was mucking about with the orbits of the outer planets. And from that speculation, they, were looking through plates of background stars to try and find some little bit of movement that would, show that something was close at hand. And they eventually found Pluto. Now, at the time, Pluto was seen as a new planet, but it's very, very small. And as you've rightly just pointed out, in the last 20 years or so, there has been an explosion in discovery of planets very similar to Pluto, mm-hmm. And such that when you start to sort of get 50, 100 Plutos, that are all sort of in this belt that's beyond Neptune called the Kuiper Belt, astronomers start to look at Pluto and say, well, there's nothing special about this. This is just the first one of a number of these dwarf planets that we've discovered. So they eventually took the measure of saying, okay, actually, we're going to just not stop calling Pluto a proper planet. But the concept of something beyond that that's actually really big. I mean, I'm talking about something the size of Jupiter. Now, Jupiter's the biggest planet in the solar system. It's very, very large, very, very heavy gravitational field. And if you see it in the sky, even though it's 5 times further away from the sun than our planet, it's actually still one of the brightest stars in the sky at certain points. So it's an immense planet. And I'm talking about something of that proportion, but that's lying an extremely large distance away. And the concept that I've come across is that the moons of this planet are capable of being warmed by it such that they could have life. And this, for me, is the exciting part of it, because in the 70s, people were, up to about the 70s, people were very excited about the possibility of finding life in the solar system. Mm-hmm. And people used to talk about, potentially there'd be alien civilizations on Venus and aliens and Martians in War of the Worlds and all that kind of stuff.
Well, if you listen to, like, Michio Kaku, who's been around for quite some time, they have descriptions that they've categorized, what an advanced civilization would be like, and they compare it to us, and we're sort of really down low on the totem pole,
Quite so. And so... But, the science, sort of Victorian science, which was sort of growing up quickly back in the 60s and 70s, the idea of, well, there's life everywhere, the Victorians were great. They thought, they were really, really open-minded, the Victorians, and they thought there was just, they were great, there's great science fiction written during that time, because they were really open to the idea of finding aliens in other worlds. And then what happened was NASA started, and the Russians and so on, started sending out probes out to Mars and out to Venus, and they just found these sort of dead rocks, and Venus was completely uninhabitable. It's like a sort of pressure cooker on the surface. I mean, melting lead and all that kind of stuff. No way there could be life on Venus. So that scorched that. And then Mars turned out to be this sort of very, very cold body that wasn't really sort of habitable, just about maybe in certain places. And I think now they're just starting to find liquid water that could be, the precursor to finding life on Mars. But science still says, look, there's nothing intelligent there. The face on Mars thing, that's nothing. That's just a sort of looking at a rock mesa from a funny angle or something.
Well, that's what NASA wants to say.
Exactly.
Yes.
I mean, the jury's out on that, in my opinion.
Exactly.
But there's some dodgy stuff that goes on with that. So so anyway, the problem was that back then in the 70s, these sort of results came back, and it was all like, oh right, well, there's another planet gone, there's another planet gone, there's another planet gone. They're all dead. There's nothing going on. It's only life on Earth. And for about 20 or 30 years, that was absolutely the concrete opinion throughout the scientific community. That's it. Solar system-wise, there might be life outside in the rest of the galaxy. We haven't found it yet, but solar system-wise, there's nothing going on. Now, whether you accept that or not, because, as you say, there could be stuff going on Mars. There's some very weird things happened with, Phobos and so on, the moon there.
Yes.
That, gives the possibility that there is some kind of presence there of some form. The dark side idea, beyond sort of creating this new potential planet out there that might cause a lot of effects in the solar system that remain unexplained, beyond that, it actually creates the potential for having a habitable world where other beings might live and be up there looking at us. So, you know, in that way, you wouldn't have to envisage, say, UFOs coming to visit this planet from very, very distant solar systems or other galaxies even. They have really just got a very short hop to get here. It's really just not very far at all. They're on our doorstep. So that's one of the sort of reasons I wrote the book, because I wanted to put forward this idea that, you know, all is not lost. The solar system could yet have a planet that remains to be discovered. And if it's there, we're really actually sort of on the cusp of it. But to go back to your other question about the sort of timing of this and the fact that there's a lot of interest building in the Planet X subject at the moment, it does come in waves. And pre-1999, there was a lot of concern about the millennium and the Y2K and so on. And there were a lot of people even then thinking, you know, there could be some kind of catastrophic event coming from space.
Yes.
And then we had 2003. There was a big talk about Planet X. Planet X was big in 2003. People really did think. There was the Zetas, they were called, and they predicted some sort of return of this Nibiru. And now we've come around to we're on the cusp of 2012, which is something I think the vast majority, even the general public, realise that there's something rather special about 2012, and it's not just the Olympics. You know, there's the potential there for the end of the Mayan Age, meaning something's going to come to an end, and what does that mean for us all on a cosmological level?
Yes.
That has again generated, when you talk about big cycles of like sort of 4,000 or 5,000 years, like the Mayan calendar is over 5,000 years. People start inevitably thinking, well, it must be something to do with space, because it's such a long time scale. There must be something cyclical going on with space. So, you know, this is where Planet X crops up again.
Yes, I want to get into those ideas with you. You know, we can go into the whole 2012 issue and also bring up the Colburn Bible as well, what they have to say about this body. But before we do all that, I just wanted to just backtrack you slightly, just for those who are trying to put this all together, because this is what I feel. I think there's a lot of information floating around on the internet. I think the internet is a great tool, and used in the right way, you can learn so much. But there might be people picking up information here and there, and they're not getting the full picture. So I just wanted to give a bit of a historical timeline to you know, you've touched on it, but just pick it up a bit more further about the discovery of this idea of a body, because from what I understand, there had been talk within the astronomical community that there might be another body out there, but where they got that information from, as you say, the Victorians, I think you gave a really good example there, had such a lively imagination, and that's so very true. But as we know, a probe was sent up in 1983, and a probe was sent up because obviously they were picking up perturbations off of the planets, and that's basically, I think, a fancy word to say gravitational pull, and so they kind of assumed that there's something there. Did you want to just explain that a bit further as to, you know, the whole process of what happened there? I think it was the IRAS
telescope.
Infrared telescope, yes.
Yeah, when you're trying to pick up a body in the solar system itself, your problem is visible light. The sunlight from the sun reflects back from planetary bodies. So anything that's fairly close to the sun and big, we see in the sky. Anything that's very, very small, like an asteroid, we have to use very big telescopes to see. And anything that's very, very far away, even if it's a very substantial planet, quickly gets lost in the darkness of space. So, for instance, Neptune and Uranus, you can't see them with a visible eye. You can't just look up in the sky and spot them, even though they're gas giants. They're, you know, immense planets, but they're so far away that you can't see them. So, so that there's a limit to how far into the solar system you can see. Now, so that's with visible light. So scientists trying to find planets beyond need to actually use other parts of the spectrum to look at, and they use infrared for finding warm bodies, effectively, that are within the solar system, that are radiating heat, but you can't see them with light. And this dark star, as I describe it, would be a sub-brown dwarf. It would be radiating heat to some degree, and therefore you should be able to spot it using an infrared telescope. Now the problem is you can't just set up an infrared telescope in your back garden and look up into space, because we're surrounded by heat. You know, if we live in a temperate climate like we do in England, you can't use an infrared telescope. You have to freeze it. You have to have it cryogenically frozen. So you either take it to somewhere very, very cold, And NASA have currently got, I think, Sophia, which is a telescope backed up on a 747. They take up into the high stratosphere and cryogenically freeze this thing and use that. Or you put it into space, so it's very, very cold, obviously. And again, you still have to keep the damn thing cool. Or you take it to somewhere like Antarctica or up in the mountain in Chile, somewhere really pretty chilly, and then, freeze this thing down, because you have to have the telescope itself very, very cold, and anything coming in at you through the atmosphere is going to be sort of messed about by all the atmospheric distortion of the heat in the atmosphere. So it's a big problem using these infrared telescopes. Now, IRAS was the NASA's first attempt at using an infrared telescope, and it was pretty crude. And you'll hear skeptics on the internet who'll say, oh yeah, well, IRAS didn't spot it, so therefore it's not there. But that's not really true. Firstly, it didn't do a very thorough job, and it was pretty crude. And secondly, it did actually come up with some anomalies. And the one you're describing in 1983 was an article that ended up in the Washington Times that was describing a Jupiter-sized body in the solar system that had been discovered by IRAS. And people got quite excited about this because it made the broadsheets. But as it turned out, NASA then sort of backtracked and said, well, no, actually...
Well, we didn't actually find it.
No. And there were a couple of incidents like this, and one of the ones that I've described is another very similar thing, actually, that happened at exactly the same time, that was another Jupiter-sized planet that they discovered in the solar system, which was not in Orion, which the Washington Post one was describing, but in the constellation of Sagittarius. And that's the one I think...
about that one.
Yeah, and that's the one I think is actually for real. I think that probably is Planet X.
Right.
And again, what happened was IRAS kind of ran out of funds, and it was being run jointly by the Americans in NASA, and they were also using teams from Britain and I think from the Netherlands. And the Europeans were very, very keen to pursue this subject. They wanted to...
That's my understanding as well, yes.
But
NASA wasn't.
And NASA were like, well, I mean, whether you look at it from a sort of semi-conspiratorial aspect or whether they just didn't have the money, I don't know. I mean, NASA at the time had a lot of money, so I'd be surprised if that was the issue.
Yes.
I mean, nowadays you could think, well, maybe they haven't, but back then they had big, big budgets.
Yep.
But they kind of shelved it, and a lot of these things didn't really get looked at properly, and they just ended up sort of getting kicked into the long grass. Now we have another infrared telescope up there because they're getting a bit better at doing this, and they put another sky search up there called WISE. And this WISE thing is just about, it's sort of 100,000 times better than IRAS. So, really speaking, if WISE has done a reasonably good job mapping the sky with warm objects, then it will have located any other planets in the solar system. However, finding a planet and saying that's a planet in the solar system are two different things. Because, as you rightly pointed out at the top of the show, there are lots of specks of all kinds of stuff up there. And how do you differentiate between a warm object that's quite close to you and a speck of sunlight coming from a star a long way away from you? And that's the issue. The only way you can determine that that object is close to you is by seeing it move.
Yes.
And that means that these infrared telescopes have to do kind of plates like they used to do, where they take a picture of one part of the sky and take a picture of the other part of the sky, same part of the sky 6 months later, and then 6 months later, and then compare them and then spot the difference, like the old spot the difference puzzles. Spot the difference thing is something in your solar system because it's moved. Now, the problem with WISE is even with sort of cryogenically freezing down these infrared telescopes, they don't last very long, and they've only actually been able to do sort of 2 6-month sky searches.
Right.
So the chances are that if there is a dark star up there, they should find it. The chances are that they should find it. It should be there for them to see, and that their scope's powerful enough to pick it up. But it's not an absolute given that they would. So again, even astronomers who are interested in this subject, and believe me, there are some who believe that this object is out there, they are cautious about whether this will give a definitive answer as to whether this object's out there or not.
And I think that's, I like what you've just said there, because there seems to be also like scientific theories now trying to sort of catch up with itself. Obviously, you've heard of, they're renaming Planet X and calling it Nemesis now. Some are, not everybody. And there's the Nemesis theory, so no longer is it just some big asteroid that hit the Earth and maybe wiped out the dinosaurs. Now maybe it's a body like Planet X called Nemesis, and they're using that theory. So, it's interesting how all of this is now coming into the scientific community in one form or another, and then translated down into the public in dribs and drabs.
Yeah, Nemesis was around about the same time as that IRAS thing that we were talking about, 1982, about 85, I think, Nemesis came out. And the idea of that was that scientists who were looking at the extinction of the dinosaurs, and, well, paleontologists, really, people who were looking back through the fossil record, thought that they had discovered a regularity to extinction-level events. So, you know, you look at about 70-odd million years ago, the dinosaurs got wiped out, and then there was another one, I think the Permian Triassic, around about 250 million years ago, and they were looking at these things, and they were finding that these catastrophic events, which were presumably most likely caused by impacts to the planet, which were killing and destroying sort of huge amounts of flora and fauna on our planet, had cyclical behaviours to them, and they're around about 30 million years. So every 30 million years, the Earth was being banged by something, and it was causing a wipeout. And, you know, people started to take this quite seriously at the time and tried to figure out why is it that every 30 million years we were getting bashed. And Nemesis was the idea that came out, that there was a dark star, effectively, they actually called it at the time a black dwarf, that was out in the comet clouds in a sort of irregular orbit, and every so often it would sweep through a comet swarm and send that crashing down into the solar system, and that's why Earth was getting hit regularly. So this is where the idea of Nemesis came from, and it's, you know, quite an old idea, and it hasn't entirely died out. You know, the people who put that idea forward still advocate it, but a lot of scientists now think that 30 million year cycle probably is a bit of a, you know, it's not probably right. But, you know, people argue these things backwards and forwards. And if they found a black dwarf or a brown dwarf or a dark star or whatever you want to call it that happened to have a cycle of around about 30 million years as it goes around, you bet your bottom dollar that theory will become very, very popular again.
Exactly, and this is how science works. We are dealing with theories here. Nobody knows everything for certain. It's constantly on the move and progressing, and that's the beauty of you know, the world that we live in. There's many ideas, and they, as you say, you know, Planet X has been popular in the past, and then it's died out, and then it's been popular again. And we do go through cycles of understanding, trying to figure out what all of this is about. But we're going to take a quick break, Andy.
Okay.
So you can just take a quick rest, and we'll be back in a couple of minutes, and we're going to continue this conversation, and let's try to get into now where we are, you know, with 2012. And I'm really interested to know your ideas and how you maybe feel about all of this, you know, the information about 2012 and if Planet X will be seen, and where you stand with all of that. So we're going to take a break, and we'll be back shortly. Me, your host, Valentine St. Aubin. You're listening to Esoteric Discussions here on Peterborough FM, and I'm joined by a great guest tonight, Andy Lloyd, and we've been talking about Planet X, and we're going to continue our discussion. He's given us a great introduction and you know, background and history to this subject. Andy, are you with me?
Yeah. Hi.
Okay, there. So let's continue our chat. What I was wanting to get into next now is where we are, you know, in terms of the whole 2012 issue. I know a lot of people are becoming aware of 2012 mainly because of movies such as 2012 and other things getting people's attention. But obviously, this is something that's that, you know, in the metaphysical community we've known about for quite some time. How does, in your opinion, how does Planet X fit into all of this? I mean, let's talk about this Comet Elenin, for example. There's been a lot of stirrings on the internet about what Comet Elenin is. So I'd like you to maybe just give me your idea of how you find all of this information with Comet Elenin, because it seems to be they're trying to tie it to catastrophe and the stirrings of 2012.
Yeah, a lot of people have predicted down the last few years that, which was linked in actually with the Colburn Bible thing that you were mentioning earlier on, that there would be a return of planet Nibiru, which is, you know, from my point of view, this dark star thing. And in Sitchin's work to do with Nibiru, he's got this planet going around a 3,600-year orbit, and it passes into the solar system like a comet, and will approach our planet. It won't actually get close to our planet, will approach it, you know, sort of coming near the asteroid belt, effectively. And this happens every sort of 3,500 years. And people argue the toss over whether that time of its return is now, or whether it's completely the opposite way around and it's, you know, sort of sometime off in 1,000 years or so. And I'm of the camp that says it's a long way out. But there are a lot of people who argue that it's coming now, and they do so because they argue that the last time it came back was during the time of the Exodus.
Yes, yeah.
And they say that there's a biblical description of this planet, and it was all tied in with, the pharaohs and Moses coming out of Egypt with the Israelites. So they make quite a sort of strong argument about this, and they say that, this is a sort of important time now, and it's all the more important because, the Mayans who created this absolutely stunning calendar, this really, really complicated mathematical construction, but effectively built by a bunch of farmers out in, Mexico in the jungles of Yucatan. They came up with this incredibly complicated mathematical system to describe very, very long periods of time, very, very accurately. And this complex calendar was set up in such a way that it started, I think, around about 3,100 BC, something like that, and would end in 2012, or at least a phase of it would end in 2012. And the reason why people get very anxious about this is because their cousins, the Aztecs, also had similar type of calendrical systems, and they had mythologies about previous ages which had come to an end catastrophically. So you'd have a sort of one age coming, ending in fire, and
yes.
one end in a great deluge, and so on. And this age would, this was, I think, the sixth age now that we're in, and that would eventually, the sixth sun would come to an end as well. So when you tie those two things in together, it doesn't take an awful lot of imagination to get anxious about an incoming massive body that could render a massive catastrophe to our world, which would fit with both this prediction of Planet X, plus also the Mayan prediction about the end of their calendar. And the Mayans never said what would happen at the end of the calendar.
That's right.
They just had a calendar ending.
That's right, yeah.
But it sets it up for a very sort of anxious time for us, because if, as you were saying earlier, you have a sort of an affinity for ancient mythologies, ancient beliefs, stuff that you have a spiritual feeling for, that you can tie yourself into sort of the way of thinking of the ancients, you can see that there may well be an element of truth in what they've said that our modern skepticism tends to sort of, say, oh, that's a lot of rubbish, and people throw it out the window.
Exactly.
But who's to say that there was not actually some sort of belief system behind this calendar that is lost?
Well, I was just going to add to what you said, and you said it very well. We also have the Hopi prophecy as well, and that, as they say, we're coming into this time of great purification. But they also give us a few pointers as well, and they talk about the blue Kishina star, which they believe has come and gone, and now they're waiting for the red Kishina star to make its appearance as well. So how do you feel about Comet Elenin? Do you think that it is making these alignments that people are claiming and kicking off this seismic activity?
I did a really, really interesting thing with Richard Hogle and Project Camelot, and we had a sort of a round table discussion about Elenin, and people have got very, very different opinions about this. I think it's fair to say that given the sort of sense of anxiety about a potential Planet X return, that any comets that show up this next 12 months are going to be significant in the minds of people who are worried about this. The thing that actually makes Elenin stand out, because in actual fact, as a comet, it's pretty lousy. I mean, it's a rubbish comet. It's very,
it's
very
quite small, though, isn't it?
And even sort of established, really good astronomers are struggling to get any kind of decent image of this thing. And you look at photographs on the internet of coming out of the sort of scientific community, and it's just a little.
It's just very dim, isn't it?
Yeah. So it's not a very exciting comet, and in actual fact, it's pretty much at its brightest point like next week. It could be breaking up at the moment.
Well, I was about to say, because I think I've heard, if it's not the person that discovered it himself, saying that he thinks it's now breaking up.
Yeah, and that would be normal for a comet, because if you have a long period comet that's been far, far out in the solar system, has been frozen for donkey's years, and really has never got anywhere close to the sun, which Elenin is probably one of these things. And it approaches the solar system, as you were saying before, it got perturbed, it just got sort of jostled out of its position and comes flying in towards the sun very, very fast, and gets captured by the sun into a different kind of orbit, which is what's happening to this thing. Comets work like this. The reason why you see comets in the sky is that the heat of the sun blasts out all these volatile frozen chemicals, water and so on, and it blasts out this huge tail, which is this immense tail that we see. And that actual event is can be catastrophic for the comet itself, because all of these ices are melted, they're all flying off, and it's a sort of a reactive brew that's going on, and it can cause an explosion, effectively, that rips apart the comet. So during its very exciting sort of movement around the sun, it runs the risk of breaking apart, and that could be happening. Now, one of the things I think is very curious about Elenin itself, and I think one of the reasons why it caught imagination perhaps more than it might have done otherwise, is the name of it. And this discoverer was Leonid Elenin, who's a Russian astronomer. And if you take his name and split it up a little bit, you've got Leo, which is the constellation it was found in, and then Elenin, the first three letters of which are Ele, E-L-E. And in the film Deep Impact some years ago,
yes, I remember it, yeah.
Yeah, when they were talking about this potential catastrophic impact coming in, and that, you know, the government covered it up, and, you know, that's kind of a blueprint for what people think might be happening now with Nibiru.
Yeah.
ELE was the code name for it, and in the film, the hero, you know, there's some anxiety that he might be having an affair, or someone might be having an affair, because there's this name Ellie and it keeps getting passed around, and the wife of the politician thinks, who's this Ellie, you know, what's it all about, and it turns out to be a code for extinction level event. And so you've got this really, really weird thing where the guy who discovered it, his name sort of incorporates these sort of symbols that we're familiar with through films and through our constellation and so on.
Yes.
And that creates a synchronicity. It creates this kind of coincidence that people think, whoa, that's really weird. And it is weird. And I think that sparked quite a lot of imagination with this. I don't think Elenin itself is a threat to us. It is a small comet. It could be breaking up, as you say. It's very, very odd, as Richard Hoagland points out, that it achieves its closest point to the Sun dead bang on the 10th anniversary of September the 11th. That's just, again, just plain weird. And he's pointed out a number of other sort of synchronicities and alignments and so on to do with, you know, certain bodies in the solar system and certain artificial satellites and so on that he thinks are also relevant. But I'm not convinced that needs, you know, be something that we get really alarmed about. But there is one other thing I think I should mention that is doing the rounds on the internet and may have some significance.
Okay, we've got about a minute. So okay, yep.
And that is that some people have said that Elenin is connected with the Japanese earthquake back some months ago.
Yes.
And that there are 2 points in its cycle, back then and also in November. Now, if these people are right, then it's possible that there could be a repeat event of the earthquake in November.
Okay.
That's only if they're right, and that's only if Elenin survives.
Yes.
Because what they're saying is the alignment with Earth creates some kind of resonance effect that's causing seismic activity. So I'm interested to see if that happens towards the end of November. Obviously, hope it doesn't, but if it does, there may be something to it.
I think there's a bit of watch and see now, isn't there? Because a lot has been said about alignments. I mean, from an astrological point of view, you know, an astrologer can tell you the alignments of what caused the Japanese earthquake. We don't have to go into Elenin for it. The signature will be there within the chart. So, you know, there's always alignments going on. So, well, it's all very interesting, and I think you've done an excellent job of presenting this information tonight.
Thank you.
And well, we've run out of time.
Okay.
But thank you so much for being a guest tonight, Andy. Tell us your website.
It's called the Dark Star Theory, and people just Google me, actually, Andy Lloyd. That's the easiest way of finding me. But it's darkstar1.co.uk.
Okay, excellent.
Thank you.
Okay, so, well, that's it for tonight. I'm sorry to have teased you as a bit of a taster, wasn't it? But excellent information that he shared with us tonight. But that's it for tonight, I'm afraid. We've run out of time. I'll be back again with another show sometime, not next week, but the week after that. So until next time, keep your eyes on the stars. You have to think of anything that relates to the domain of information and communication, and that's what the planet Mercury rules. And when it goes into its retrograde phase, well, it makes everything a bit chaotic, and it throws it out of whack. And I know people say to me, well, how can that be? Well, what you have to understand about astrology is that it's very much based on vibration, as everything in this universe has a vibration. So, you know, what happens above affects us below. If the planet is giving off a funny kind of energy, we're going to feel that within the fiber of everything on this planet here. And that's how it all works. So, Oh yes, and have you been watching the World Championships for the athletics? Well, I mean, maybe you have, maybe you haven't, but it's been quite interesting because, of course, Usain Bolt, who is absolutely phenomenal, false started and was disqualified from the 100-meter, so he couldn't actually compete in that. And of course, he is the Olympic champion. And he wasn't the only one having problems. All sorts of things were going wrong for all sorts of different athletes. And let's see, Dayron Robles, I believe that's his name. He's the 100-meter high hurdle champion. He was in the race and going over the hurdles, and a couple of times bumped into the Chinese athlete, and he won the race, but then ended up having to be disqualified. So he became world champion and then lost the title for obstruction. So many strange things. And also, the 4x100, the British team got itself into a bit of a mess during the 4x100. Basically, on the last leg, the British, one of the runners of the last leg, the British runner, he was in his lane, but his body seemed to have been in the next lane for whatever reason, and that lane was the American lane. So as the incoming runner was coming, he bumped into the upper shoulders of the British athlete and literally took a somersault in mid-air and fell onto the ground, and then affected the lane next to him. So well, there was all sorts of things going on, in the World Championships. It was very, very bizarre, and definitely a Mercury retrograde scenario. So all of that's now coming to an end. And thank goodness for that, because I don't think this planet could take another week of Mercury moving in a strange way. So hopefully you should be finding your feet, and things you have been trying to get off the ground should now be getting some kind of momentum. It probably will take another week, but most likely by September, by next week this time, you'll be off and running. And I've got some sad news. My event, Future Talk 2012 and Beyond, it's had to be cancelled. This is mainly because of low ticket sales, but I would like to thank those of you who did buy a ticket and did show interest. Unfortunately, there's a lot going on with the economy. A lot of people are holding on to their money, and these types of things are the first types of things to really feel the crunch. Events and the artistic world, we all feel it first. So I've had to actually cancel the event. It would have been a good one. I was going to have Anne Ella come over from the United States. Anne's been a guest on my show previously. And I was also going to be joined by Alex G from On the Edge, from Edge Media. But, well, anyway, it had to be cancelled. So onwards and upwards, as they say. But nothing is lost completely, because I had planned on talking about Planet X throughout the month of September for both of these shows. So tonight, of course, I'm going to be talking about Planet X, and we'll also talk about this Comet Elenin. What is it? What is it not? There's a lot of speculation as to what Comet Elenin is. And I'll be talking about it again in another show later in September. So as I was saying, there seems to be a lot of confusion out there about what Comet Elenin is. Is it Planet X? Is it not? I mean, as far as I'm concerned, Comet Elenin is not Planet X. That's my feel on it, and I'm not the only person that thinks that. Jalila Starr, for example, I know she has said that Comet Elenin is not Planet X. Nancy Lieder has also said that as well. And also, of course, Anne Ella has definitely said that she does not feel that Comet Elenin is Planet X, and actually she feels that Comet Elenin is more so a distraction and it's disinformation. But she'll be able to support her statement in her next interview, in her next follow-up interview when I speak to her later in the month. So, there's a lot of confusion out there on the internet, but I think what's been going on with Comet Elenin is that both professional and amateur astronomers have been looking at this body. They've been, I know at least, with amateur type astronomers or people just interested in general, have been playing around with, certain types of software that allows you to look at the alignments of the planets and what have you. And they've been coming up with this idea that when Comet Elenin makes a certain alignment, things are happening. Mostly seismic activity is happening. I believe it's assumed that the earthquake in Chile and also the earthquake in Japan had a certain kind of alignment with Comet Elenin, and hence the high-intensity earthquake. So is this truly the case? Or is it just HARP? You know, there's just so much out there, and you know, you really do have to sift through the information and make a deduction for yourself. No one's going to spoon feed you this information. You have to feel what's right for you, and you have to know if it's correct or if it's not correct. But I'll be doing my best tonight to try to bring some light to what all of this is. What is Planet X? What might Comet Elenin really be? I've got a great guest tonight, Andy Lloyd, author of Dark Star, and we'll try to figure out the fact from the fiction if we can. I mean, you know, nothing is for certain in life, but we'll give it a go. And